This is the Authentic Change Podcast, and I am Mike Horne. Authenticity reflects what we want from each other and our organizations: open communication, trust, community, fun, and opportunity. I want to help you to do your best in your personal and professional relationships. This podcast delivers expertise, insights, and approaches on authentic leadership, to live your purpose, to lead from your values, to establish connected relationships, to steward people and culture change, to build and sustain prosperity, and to open doors and possibilities. This podcast will assist you in paving the way forward to personal, team, and organizational prosperity. Welcome to this episode of Authentic Change with Mike Horne. I am delighted today to welcome as our guest and introduce to our listeners Gary Muszynski. Gary is the CEO of Orchestrating Excellence, which is a leadership and team development firm. I've known Gary now going on decades, and what I can attest to is the strength of his message, his perseverance, and his ability to motivate and to inspire others, and really help to orchestrate excellence in organizations. Gary has experience in building mindsets and skills for virtual collaboration and leadership, and he has a proven ability, at least in my observation, to influence change, galvanize action, consult, and collaborate at all levels of an organization. And Gary has built teams of people around him, engaging diverse talent to deliver on a global scale. And I'm so glad that you're going to have the opportunity today to meet Gary, to learn about Gary, and to further our discussion on authentic change. Welcome, Gary. Could you say a few words about yourself?
Mike, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much. Wow, what do I want to say about myself? Well, I've been interested in human growth and change for a long time. I'm really interested in how the left brain and right brain work together, or sometimes at odds, in the change process. How we can resist change individually or as teams or as cultures, regardless of what, the more rational aspects of us might say, or whatever the mission statement is of the organization, whether or not there's really a harmony and congruence there between the stated ideals and then what people actually observe as behaviors.
Oh, Gary, Those are so many great concepts that we're going to discuss, and you're really opening up a great mine and reservoir for conversation around harmony and congruence. And I think some of our audience might not be familiar with right brain and left brain thinking. I mean, I always think about the right brain as being in charge of our creative side, and the left brain being responsible for our more rational side. But how would you describe it to our audience?
Sure. I think you stated it quite well. The left brain is more of the analytical, predictive, organized, structured. So when you're working in organizations, let's say in biotech, as you have for a long time, and you encounter people trained in the sciences and math, not across the board, but generally they're going to want to be more quote unquote data driven, understand objectives, have some kind of framework, intellectual framework that guides and informs their experience. Right brain tends to be more intuitive, body-based, creative. A lot of innovations occur by leaps that are not accounted for by rationality. A lot of our hunches, or a lot of discontinuous adjacent thinking occurs in the midbrain or in the deeper brain, in those areas. So basically, when I'm working with leaders and teams and organizations, regardless of whether they're in innovation, R&D, marketing, which you might associate more with the right brain, or sales, where there might be an interesting blend, because salespeople, if they're really good, they have to listen well. They have to empathize. And those are typically parts that we associate with the emotional brain.
Yes, it often is counterintuitive to the assumptions we make when we associate gregariousness with salespeople, where I think what most of the research I've reviewed suggests is just what you have stated, Gary, that is, salespeople are generally extraordinary listeners. Gifted salespeople are generally extraordinary listeners, and thereby engage their clients in the discovery process for solutions. So true. Typically, when I want to just continue along this discussion, because I think it raises so many interesting insights and possibilities for a discussion on authenticity. And you talked about hunches, that the right brain hemisphere perhaps relies on more hunches and intuition, and the other side of the brain works more on prediction, about staying in touch. It's so interesting to me, because normally when I think about integrity, for example, and this will be a great way for us to start to distinguish some of these concepts around integrity and authenticity. But typically when I'm thinking about integrity, I don't think about hunches. I don't think about intuition. And I wonder what we lose out of that conversation or that focus, because in many ways, when we describe integrity, we're describing something that is of a whole cloth, or something that's the genuine article. Or if I were a structural engineer, I might say it hangs together really well. And most of that arises out of a strong moral and ethical foundation, and I believe based on humanistic values. But where does this idea, or where would the idea of hunches or intuition play in integrity? Or perhaps it doesn't. But I'm curious what your thoughts are in that regard, Gary.
That's a great query, Mike. I think of integrity as integral, integrated. So what are we integrating exactly? So we could be integrating left and right brain. We could be integrating conscious persona with the richness of the dark side, right? Of our unconscious motivations and drivers, which, as you know, for leaders, if you don't have a good handle on that, will come back to bite you in 1,000 ways.
It's no wonder I'm so fascinated with Carl Jung, and particularly given his role in the development of our understanding of unconscious. And as I often tell my listeners, that three things that have guided my work or guide my coaching practice today are three observations that Carl Jung made. The first is you are what you do, not what you say you'll do. Mm-hmm. And the second is the greatest privilege of a lifetime is to become the person you are. And thirdly, and I'll paraphrase this, if you want to do anything about the first two, then you need to accept where you are now.
Yeah, beautiful. Beautiful. Yeah. I love that.
Yeah.
I wanted to share with you something that I looked up, and it was, I'll just read a little bit of it, but I think it's apropos to our conversation. This is from Wikipedia, but I looked up authenticity from the realm of philosophy. I thought this was interesting. Authenticity is a concept in psychology, existential psychiatry, philosophy, and aesthetics. And it basically says, in existentialism, authenticity is the degree to which a person's actions are congruent with their beliefs and desires, despite external pressures to conformity.
Yes, and this is why authentic leadership is so important as we enter the new COVID endemic stage, because And these are again our distinctions between integrity and authenticity. Integrity is tested over time. It's tested when you're a child. Do you shoplift? Do you break the rules? It's tested in your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. Integrity gets tested throughout life seasons. I think about it as sort of the music. It is, I don't believe there's a be all and end all state in integrity. It's a quality that shapes us and that we shape over time. Mm-hmm. Authenticity is something that's different, though, because as you've stated, authenticity is about congruency. In its simplest form, we talk about words and actions matching. That, as Jung stated, you are what you do, not what you say you'll do, right? Mm-hmm. Words and actions matter. But, even maybe perhaps more importantly, it's getting these ABCs right on matching attitudes, behaviors, cognitions, because not only are your words and actions important, but the ways that we think about situations are important too. And we might lump that into the broader category mm-hmm. of mindset. So if authenticity is about congruency, then words and actions and ways of thinking aligning, what we know about people who have congruency is that they're generally happy people. Mm-hmm. And I'm not describing the kind of happiness that comes with finding a new boyfriend or a new girlfriend or the birth of a child or the adoption of a puppy into your home. Not that kind of love, but the sustained happiness that comes from a congruency between words, actions, and ways of thinking. Mm-hmm. So helpful to point that out, Gary, because mm-hmm. I think, for our listeners, that's what we strive for, is how do we demonstrate that in authentic leadership so that not only are employees the focus of managerial influence, we add to that employees influence managers as well.
Right. And yet the complexity begins there, because my curiosity is, how does one maintain integrity and authenticity in what are sometimes less than integral and authentic systems?
Sure. Behavior is a function of person plus environment, right? We know that.
Right.
That's right. Social. So, I think that when Freud began the whole business, it was just a focus on the person. And then later the social psychologists introduced the concept of environment. So we really see behavior as a function of all the things we are, who we are, our psychological house. And then we're also influenced and have an opportunity to shape the environment.
Right.
So, thinking about, are there environments that are inhospitable through open and transparent communication for trusting relationships? Wow. In my experience, Gary, it takes a lot of work. It's almost antithetical to most organizational experience. And this is why I am on a mission to promote authentic leadership in the world. We need to form communities at work, and I think it's the way that we do that.
Beautiful. I love the focus on community of like-minded people who are committed to similar values and behaviors, and also holding each other to some level of accountability.
And Gary, how have you done this through Orchestrating Excellence? I mean, you've worked with clients and colleagues and bosses around the world. What's that been like in terms of how you display authenticity in your work, or how you experience it, or what kinds of insights or observations might you share with the audience?
Wow, what a great question. For a long time, my primary metaphor and experience was that of music, hence the name Orchestrating Excellence. My deep love, my most authentic self is probably as a musician. and then as a change agent and organizational effectiveness practitioner, consultant, coach, facilitator, and experience designer. So Orchestrating Excellence was my way of integrating all of those passions into a body of work that is not just conceptual and cerebral, but also has heart and emotion, and the body is involved. So we could talk about change, but unless you're moving, if you're static physically, it's kind of hard to experience change because we actually have bodies that our heads are attached to. And
Yes.
So if I'm doing something that is, I mostly worked in the realm of what I would call ritual and a learning peak experience. And the purpose of this is to demonstrate an ideal future state in the present. It's actually to shift the field and make it more coherent through music. How do I do this? It could be anywhere from 15 people to 1,500 people that are actually playing drums or percussion instruments together, moving from cacophony and discord to a high level of coherence and very, very precise playing, balancing structure, form, and feeling. And that's my vision, in a sense, for a highly functioning, high performance organization, that they're balancing the kind of systemic structure that they need to, reach their goals, but also allow some messiness for the human experience. And I found music to be, I think, the most powerful, both metaphor and actual experience of experiencing that shift and orchestrating it on an individual, team, and an organizational level.
And I think about it as the raggedy edges. And when we work with people and systems or what we might refer to as our colleagues and the groups and teams that we're members of, we really do, as you have indicated in your work, have an opportunity to shift the field. It's a way of thinking, Gary, that I don't often hear expressed. Many people talk about enlarging fields, or they talk about changing fields, getting in the right game. But this idea about shifting, maybe it's an acknowledgement of what we have with an eye towards the future.
Well, we talked about shifting mindsets. That's quite, we want to shift from a fixed or growth mindset to, in Carol Dweck's, terminology. There are other ways of doing it. If you look at the leadership circle profile, we're shifting to more of a balance of creative tendencies and actions, behaviors versus reactive. So again, this balance between the light and the dark, or, the creative, proactive behaviors we want from authentic leaders and less of the collateral damage. I think shifting collectives is the next work, because I think we have so many complex messes in the world today, anywhere you look, that it's going to require some new collaborative capability in terms of thinking, planning, and my code word for that is collective intelligence.
Yes, I drafted an article this morning on the role of integrity in business leadership as it relates to social change.
Oh, interesting.
Reflecting on the 1-year anniversary of George Floyd's murder, thinking about all of the issues that concern Americans and people around the globe: voting rights, climate change, access to healthcare. It's important in these circumstances, I think, that we begin to understand how our values shape our actions. And Gary, if I I want to ask you, what are some of the values that drive you and your work?
Creativity, inclusiveness. Um, Whenever I'm working with a client system, I'll always ask, who else needs to be in on this conversation? Who will this decision impact? So you can call that inclusive leadership. You can call it human-centered design. I mean, there's lots of ways to think about that who else needs to be at the table.
And sometimes I might express that as, who aren't we talking with?
Yeah, exactly. Who are we excluding? Right. Once you start naming what the boundaries are, you start getting clearer on why are we not. Oftentimes when I'm working with an executive leadership team, I'll say, well, what about your executive admin? Why isn't he or she part of the conversation? Because they might have some interesting insights that could be useful for us. And oftentimes I've gotten those people included in our sessions, and both they have grown as leaders in their own right by being included, but also they've been viewed as more valuable than sometimes they are viewed initially. So,
yes, I think I have a bias to always err for inclusion. And I think it's also part of the humanistic values that guide and shape our choices to engage authentically and to engage as authentic leaders. And I think about those values of respect for everything, finding dignity in those with whom we work. Everyone deserves to be loved in organizations. And sometimes I think, as Matt Kahn says, perhaps we lead with that, and others just haven't done that. They haven't experienced that as deeply as many of us have. But this idea that everyone deserves to be loved, the ideas that of dignity and respect, and I think it fosters a notion too in our humanistic values that we attract diverse ideas and diverse people around us in order to grow inclusion. And for me, these are some of the values that shape our choices for authentic leadership.
Mm-hmm. Very true. I'm curious how you see authentic leadership and integrity overlapping with psychological safety. So, for example, if I'm on a corrosive team, or I don't feel safe expressing my authentic feelings or perceptions of the team or how they regard me, I'm going to weigh what I say in a very political way.
Psychological safety has many of the action steps that I would recommend or guide a leader or an organization to take. The question is always one of scale, right? You want to create these, you want to equip your managers with the behaviors and the ideas to foster trust, to encourage full engagement in order for people to bring who they are to what they do and to bring their best to every situation. So I think that concepts of psychological safety, if we were to draw the Venn diagram, there would certainly be a large intersection of action steps to create the kind of environment that facilitates authentic leadership. I think perhaps what's distinguishable is thinking about it at scale.
Right.
And that's perhaps where we start conversations around values and the role of values in the organization. As we know, integrity is one of the most commonly held values among big companies. In some companies, we can go in the Wayback Machine. It didn't mean much. At Enron, it was the number one corporate value. And more recently, Wells Fargo.
Yeah.
And also our shifts and the zeitgeist that's occurred in executive compensation. Now, golden parachutes are triggered even in the face of transgressions that most shareholders, but this is becoming an interesting debate. You saw recently that Apple removed an executive because of some comments he made 10 or 12 years ago. So I think there are, the field is shifting, as you might say.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think values are interesting. A lot of people really say, okay, what are the values and what are the observable behaviors that bring those values to life? I like to think also of, do we have competing values here?
Oh, sure.
You know, some of Robert Keegan's work, I think, is really good. Immunity to change,
Sure.
in looking at if there's a conflict, which means that there's a split or compartmentalization, then there isn't that coherence, which relates to integrity, because we're pulled in different directions.
Yes, these competing values frameworks they're often helpful in moving groups to from two behaviors. So often a great way to do an exercise. Gary, you have raised so many areas of opportunity and thought and discussion in our podcast today that has gone all too quickly. And I'm wondering, just as we wrap up, where would our audience be able to reach you? How would they contact you? What do you want our audience to know about Orchestrating Excellence and you? But how do we get in touch with you?
Well, either via LinkedIn at Gary Muszynski. I assume that my name will be spelled somewhere because it's a bit difficult to remember. I tell people it means music on skis, and that gets them a little further. But they can check our offerings out at orchestratingexcellence.com. Mostly, we're involved in 5 different areas of work: build teams, deepen collaboration, cultivate leadership, orchestrate change, and transform conferences. So it can be a 1 to 3 hour quote unquote team building event, either live or virtual. It could be a team transformation project. You've got an underperforming team, and we work with a variety of individual and team assessments. And then it's a combination of coaching, consulting, training, and facilitation. Cultivating leadership. These are discrete modules on things like leadership agility or shifting mindsets. And then orchestrating change, usually large transformation, digital transformation, mergers and acquisitions, things where they'll want to allow people to experience what is in it for me to change my behavior to this new prescription, being required by the new CEO or by the new leadership team. So those are some of the ways. And then the unique methodology is a combination of neuroscience, which is research-based, resilience practices, conversational intelligence, which is skill building, and experiential learning.
Oh, Gary, that's wonderful. It's just so great, the offer that you're bringing to the world, the number of people and groups and organizations you've influenced and helped around the world. It's so great. And I encourage our listeners again to visit with Gary on LinkedIn, Gary Muszynski, or visit him at orchestratingexcellence.com. Gary, thank you so much. It's been an absolute delight for me to have you as our guest today on Authentic Change with Mike Horne.
I just want to say you have been a leading light in the organizational development or org effectiveness movement, and been a great mentor and exemplar to me and many, many other people. So thank you for all of your work and sacrifices.
Well, thank you, Gary. That's very kind of you to say. Again, I appreciate that so deeply. Thank you so much for that. And again, to our listeners, please visit Gary at orchestratingexcellence.com. And until our next episode, think about what you can do to lead authentically in your groups and teams at work. Once again, thank you. Thanks for listening, and I hope you'll subscribe today and tell a friend about our show. If you're looking for hands-on help to increase your success through authentic change, or have a question you'd like to hear me answer here, please email me at mike@mike-horne.com.